Sometimes the people we think we know best are carrying the heaviest secrets. For 3 years, Ryden worked alongside the same crew, loading cargo and keeping to himself, never mentioning the wife he'd lost or the life he'd left behind in Japan. When a Japanese billionaire stepped off her private jet and asked a question in her native language, the entire military crew stood silent. That's when Ryden stepped forward and answered her in perfect Japanese. Nobody saw it coming. The quiet, single father they barely knew suddenly revealed a past that changed everything. She was a powerful executive worth billions. He was a cargo handler raising his daughter alone. But what happens when two strangers discover they share the same quiet pain? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The alarm clock buzzed at 5:30, same as it had every morning for the past 3 years. Ryden Brooks rolled out of bed with the practiced quiet of a man who understood that small apartments carried sound like whispers through paper walls. His daughter Lily slept in the next room, her breathing steady and peaceful behind the thin door that separated their modest bedrooms. He pulled on his work clothes, faded jeans, steel-toed boots, and a grey t-shirt that had seen better days, but still held together like everything else in his carefully controlled life. The coffee maker gurgled to life as he moved through their morning routine with the precision of a man who had learned that structure was the difference between functioning and falling apart. Outside their kitchen window, the Nevada dawn painted the desert in shades of amber and rose. Nellis Air Force Base spread across the horizon like a small city of concrete and purpose, where massive cargo planes waited like sleeping giants for another day of moving the world's necessities from one place to another. It was honest work, the kind that left your hands dirty and your back sore, but it paid the bills and kept food on their small table. The apartment itself told the story of a man rebuilding from scratch. Mismatched furniture from garage sales and thrift stores, but everything clean and carefully maintained. A small couch faced a television that got basic channels. The kitchen table was sturdy oak, probably the most expensive thing they owned, besides Ryden's truck. And it bore the gentle scratches of 3 years' worth of homework sessions and quiet dinners for two. But if you looked closely, you'd notice the careful gaps where something important used to be. A wedding photo that once sat on the mantel, now replaced by Lily's school pictures. A set of matching dishes that had been replaced by practical mismatched plates that could survive being dropped by an 8-year-old. The deliberate absence of anything that might remind a grieving man of what he'd lost. Lily appeared in the doorway at 6:15, right on schedule. 8 years old, with her father's steady brown eyes and her mother's delicate features, she moved with the quiet confidence of a child who had learned early that life required adaptation. Her dark hair fell in waves past her shoulders, and she wore it the same way her mother once had, though Ryden never spoke of that resemblance aloud. "Morning, Dad," she said, settling into her chair at the kitchen table, where a bowl of cereal and a glass of orange juice waited for her. "Morning, sweetheart." His voice carried the gentle roughness of a man who spent most of his days speaking only when necessary. "Sleep okay?" She nodded, already focused on her breakfast, with the serious attention she brought to most things in her young life. "Mrs. Henderson is reading us a story about Japan today. About cherry blossoms and temples." Something flickered across Ryden's face, a shadow of memory or pain, gone so quickly that most people would have missed it entirely. But Lily had learned to read her father's expressions like weather patterns, and she caught the brief tightening around his eyes. "That sounds nice," he said, turning to pour coffee into his thermos. "Cherry blossoms are beautiful in the spring. Have you ever seen them?" she asked, the innocent question carrying more weight than she could possibly understand. Ryden paused, his hand still on the coffee pot handle. For a moment he was 35 again, walking through Maruyama Park in Kyoto with a young woman whose laugh could make him forget that he was thousands of miles from home. The memory came sharp and sudden, then faded like morning mist. "Once," he said simply, A long time ago, Lily accepted this answer the way she accepted most of her father's careful responses about the past, with patience. Beyond her years, and the understanding that some stories weren't ready to be told, she had learned not to push, not because he had ever been harsh with her, but because she sensed the careful balance he maintained between remembering and surviving. At 6:45, Ryden dropped Lily at the base's childcare center, where she would spend the day with other military families' children while their parents worked. She hugged him goodbye with fierce affection, her small arms tight around his neck. "Love you, Dad." "Love you too, Lily Pad." The nickname came naturally, one of the few purely happy things that had survived from his previous life. His wife had called her that first, during the brief months when they had all been together as a family. The cargo bay at Nellis hummed with activity by 7 a.m. Massive transport planes sat on the tarmac like patient beasts, while crews loaded supplies destined for military bases across the Pacific. Ryden had found his place here among men who understood the value of hard work and few questions. They knew him as reliable, punctual, and strong enough to handle any job that needed doing. His crew chief was a weathered sergeant named Bill Garrison, a 20-year veteran who ran the operation with military precision, softened by genuine care for his people. Garrison had hired Ryden 3 years ago when he'd shown up looking for work, with impressive references and a skill set that suggested military background, though he'd never volunteered details about his service record. "Morning, Brooks," Garrison called out as Ryden approached the massive C-130 that would be their focus for the day. "We've got medical supplies headed to Okinawa. Needs to be loaded with care and sealed tight." Ryden nodded and got to work, falling into the rhythm that had become second nature. Lift with your legs, secure the straps, check the manifest, move to the next crate. His hands worked with practiced efficiency, while his mind stayed carefully blank, focused only on the immediate task. The other crew members had long since stopped trying to draw him into extended conversations. He was friendly enough, always willing to help when someone needed an extra pair of hands, but he kept his personal life locked away like classified information. They respected that. Military culture understood that some men carried burdens that weren't meant for casual conversation. Around mid-morning, word spread through the cargo bay that they would have VIP visitors later in the week. A Japanese corporation was evaluating the base's logistics capabilities for a potential contract involving civilian cargo shipments. The company, Kuroda Industries, was apparently looking to expand their American operations and needed reliable transportation partners. "Big money," Garrison explained to his crew during their coffee break. "The kind of contract that could mean more steady work and better equipment for all of us. So I want everyone on their best behavior when the executives show up." Ryden listened with half his attention while the rest of his mind wandered to practical concerns. Lily had a school concert next week that he'd promised to attend. His truck needed new brake pads. The rent was due in 10 days, and while he always managed to pay it on time, there was never much left over for emergencies or small luxuries. He had built a life that worked, but it was a narrow life, carefully constructed to avoid the kind of complications that came with letting people get too close. The other men on his crew were good people, but they belonged to a world of weekend barbecues and hunting trips and conversations about wives and future plans. Ryden existed on the edges of that world, appreciated but never quite belonging. That afternoon, as they finished loading the last pallet, Garrison approached him with a clipboard and an expression that suggested he had something particular in mind. "Brooks, I want you to take point on the VIP visit next week," he said. "You know the operations better than anyone, and you've got a way of staying calm under pressure. Think you can handle showing some executives around?" Ryden paused in securing a cargo strap. The request was unusual. Garrison typically handled VIP visits himself, and Ryden had never shown any interest in taking on additional responsibilities that might draw attention or require extended interaction with strangers. "I'm not much for presentations." "Sergeant," he said carefully, "don't need presentations. Just need someone who knows the work and won't get rattled by suits and cameras. Garrison studied him for a moment. You've got more experience than you let on, Brooks. I've watched you work for 3 years, and you move like a man who's been in charge of things before. It was as close as Garrison had ever come to directly asking about Ryden's background. The question hung in the air between them, unspoken but clearly implied. Ryden finished with the cargo strap and straightened up. If you need me to do it, I'll do it. Garrison nodded, accepting both the agreement and the boundary. Good man. They'll be here Thursday morning. That evening, Ryden helped Lily with her homework at their kitchen table while dinner simmered on the stove. She was working on a math worksheet, her small face scrunched in concentration as she puzzled over word problems about trains and distances and time. "Dad," she said without looking up from her paper, "do you think Mom would be proud of me?" The question came from nowhere, the way children's most difficult questions always did. Ryden set down the dish towel he'd been folding and looked at his daughter's bent head, her hair falling across her face as she wrote, "She would be very proud of you," he said quietly. "You're smart and kind and brave. Everything she hoped you would be." Lily glanced up at him, her expression serious beyond her years. "Do you miss her?" "Every day," he said, because honesty was the only gift he had left to give her mother's memory. "But missing someone doesn't mean we stop living. It just means we carry them with us while we keep going." She nodded as if this made perfect sense, which perhaps it did to someone too young to understand the weight of permanent loss. Then she returned to her homework, leaving Ryden to wonder how many more years he could maintain this careful balance between preserving the past and building a future worth living. Later that night, after Lily had gone to bed, Ryden sat on their small couch and allowed himself to remember. Not often and never for long, but sometimes the discipline of forgetting required occasional breaks for maintenance. He remembered Yuki's laugh, bright and musical in the spring air of Kyoto. He remembered the way she had looked at him that first day they met, when he was just another American soldier trying to figure out how to order coffee in a language that felt like poetry in his mouth. He remembered their wedding, small and quiet in a temple garden, where she had worn a kimono the color of spring leaves, and he had promised to love her across any distance or difference. He remembered holding Lily for the first time, 3 months before the cancer took Yuki away, and the way his wife had whispered instructions in both English and Japanese, as if she could prepare him for everything that was coming through the power of words alone. The memories were precious and painful in equal measure, and he rationed them carefully. Too little, and he feared forgetting. Too much, and he couldn't function in the present that his daughter needed him to inhabit. Outside, the desert wind stirred the curtains in their small living room, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. Tomorrow would bring another day of cargo and careful routine, another day of building the quiet life that kept them both afloat. But tonight, for just a few minutes, Ryden allowed himself to remember what love had felt like when it was new and full of possibilities. In her bedroom, Lily slept with the peaceful stillness of childhood, dreaming of cherry blossoms and stories she couldn't yet understand. And in the space between memory and hope, her father kept watch over their small, carefully constructed world, protecting it from the kind of complications that could shatter the fragile peace they had built together. Thursday morning arrived with the crisp clarity that Nevada desert mornings brought, the kind of light that made everything look sharp-edged and purposeful. Ryden arrived at the cargo bay earlier than usual, knowing that VIP visits meant extra scrutiny and the possibility of complications he preferred to avoid. The crew had spent the previous day preparing. Equipment was arranged with military precision, paperwork organized, safety protocols reviewed. Garrison moved through the morning briefing with the focused energy of a man who understood that contracts like this could change everything for his operation. "Remember, they're evaluating us for reliability and efficiency," he told his assembled crew. "Answer questions honestly, demonstrate competence, and keep the conversation professional. These people are considering moving millions of dollars worth of cargo through our facility. At 10:30, A convoy of black vehicles approached the cargo bay, their polished surfaces reflecting the morning sun like mirrors. The lead car was a Mercedes sedan that probably cost more than Ryden made in 2 years. Behind it followed 2 SUVs filled with what appeared to be security personnel and assistants carrying briefcases and tablets. The woman who emerged from the Mercedes commanded attention immediately. Keiko Nakamura was probably in her early 40s, dressed in a charcoal business suit that managed to be both professionally conservative and elegantly expensive. Her movements were precise and purposeful, the bearing of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room she entered. She was accompanied by a small delegation, 2 Japanese executives, an American liaison who looked uncomfortable in the desert heat, and a photographer whose presence suggested this visit was being documented for corporate purposes. Garrison stepped forward to greet the visitors, his military bearing evident in every gesture. "Ms. Nakamura, welcome to Nellis Air Force Base. I'm Sergeant Bill Garrison, and this is my cargo operations team." Keiko's acknowledgement was polite but distant. Her attention already focused on the massive transport planes and loading equipment around them. She asked several technical questions about capacity, scheduling, and security protocols, all delivered in accented but perfectly clear English. The tour proceeded smoothly for the first 30 minutes. Keiko examined manifest systems, observed loading procedures, and took notes on a tablet while her photographer documented the facilities. Her questions were sharp and informed, revealing a deep understanding of logistics operations that impressed even Garrison. Ryden remained in the background, part of the crew, but not actively engaged in the presentation. He monitored cargo operations, ensured safety protocols were followed, and tried to stay invisible in the way he had mastered over 3 years of avoiding attention. Everything changed when they reached the secure storage area where sensitive cargo waited for special handling procedures. Keiko approached a particular set of crates marked with Japanese shipping labels, her expression shifting to something more intense and focused. She turned to her American liaison and spoke rapidly in Japanese, her tone carrying obvious frustration. The liaison looked confused and slightly panicked, clearly not understanding what she was saying. She repeated herself more slowly, but with growing irritation, and then looked to her Japanese executives for clarification. What followed was several minutes of increasingly tense conversation in Japanese between Keiko and her team, while the American members of both groups stood awkwardly by, unable to follow the discussion. Garrison's expression showed professional concern as he realized he was losing control of the situation. Finally, Keiko turned to face the assembled Americans, her professional composure slipping slightly. These containers were supposed to be marked for special handling according to our shipping instructions. Can anyone explain why they appear to have been processed as standard cargo? Her American liaison fumbled with his tablet, clearly struggling to understand both the technical issue and the potential implications for the business relationship. Garrison looked to his crew members, but none of them had been directly involved with those particular containers. The silence stretched uncomfortably as it became clear that no one present could provide the explanation Keiko needed. Her expression grew cooler, the kind of professional disappointment that could end negotiations before they properly began. That's when Ryden stepped forward, removing his work gloves as he approached. His movement was calm and deliberate, drawing attention without demanding it. "Sumimasen, Nakamura-san," he said, his voice carrying the respectful tone of someone who understood not just the language, but the cultural context behind it. "Sono container wa tokubetsu toriakai no shirushi ga arimasu ga, shorui no machigai de hyojun kamotsu toshite toroku sarete shimatta yo desu." The effect was immediate and electric. Every person in the group turned to stare at Ryden with varying degrees of shock. Keiko's eyes widened with surprise, then focused on him with sharp attention as she processed not just his fluent Japanese, but the respectful formality of his address. Garrison's mouth actually dropped open slightly. In 3 years, he had never heard Ryden speak anything but English, and certainly never with the kind of cultural sophistication that was evident in both his language and his bearing as he addressed the Japanese executive. The other crew members exchanged glances of complete bewilderment. The quiet cargo handler they had worked alongside for years had just revealed a hidden dimension of his background that recontextualized everything they thought they knew about him. Keiko recovered her composure first, responding in Japanese with a question about the specific documentation requirements. Ryden answered smoothly, demonstrating not just linguistic fluency, but detailed knowledge of international shipping protocols and Japanese business practices. Their conversation continued for several minutes, conducted entirely in Japanese, while everyone else watched in fascination. Ryden's manner was respectful but confident, his understanding of the technical issues evident in the way Keiko's expression gradually shifted from frustration to something approaching impressed surprise. When they finally switched back to English, it was Keiko who took the initiative. "Thank you, Mr. Brooks." "Ryden Brooks. Mr. Brooks has correctly identified the documentation error and can arrange for proper reclassification of the containers," she said, addressing Garrison but keeping her eyes on Ryden. "His understanding of our requirements is unexpectedly comprehensive." Garrison found his voice, though it carried a note of amazement that he didn't try to hide. "Brooks, I had no idea you spoke Japanese." Ryden's expression remained calm, but those who knew him well enough might have caught the slight tension around his eyes that appeared when his carefully maintained privacy was unexpectedly breached. "I spent some time there," he said simply, offering no additional explanation. Keiko stepped closer, her professional interest clearly piqued. "Your Japanese is very good, Mr. Brooks, very proper. Where did you learn to speak with such formality?" "Kyoto," he said after a moment's hesitation. "I was stationed there for a while." Something in his tone, a careful neutrality that suggested deeper history, caused Keiko to study his face more intently. Her expression showed the recognition of someone who understood that certain kinds of experience left marks that extended far beyond language skills. "I see," she said quietly. And in those two words was the acknowledgement that she did, indeed, see more than he had intended to reveal. The remainder of the tour took on a different character. Keiko directed many of her technical questions specifically to Ryden, clearly recognizing that his knowledge extended well beyond basic cargo handling. His answers revealed understanding of international regulations, cultural considerations in business dealings, and operational details that impressed her entire team. By the time the visit concluded, the dynamics had shifted completely. What had begun as a routine facility inspection had become an evaluation of capabilities that no one had known existed. Keiko exchanged business cards with Garrison, but made a point of also speaking privately with Ryden before departing. "I would like to discuss your potential involvement in our operations." "Mr. Brooks," she said, her manner professional but carrying an undertone of genuine interest, "would you be available for further conversations?" Ryden glanced at Garrison, who nodded encouragingly, clearly recognizing an opportunity when he saw one. "I'm available," Ryden said carefully. "Excellent. I will be in touch." She paused, studying his face once more. "It is rare to find someone with your combination of practical skills and cultural understanding. I look forward to learning more about your background." After the convoy departed, the cargo bay buzzed with speculation and amazement. The crew members who had worked alongside Ryden for years suddenly saw him as a completely different person, someone whose hidden depths had been dramatically revealed in a single, unexpected moment. Garrison pulled him aside, his expression mixing professional excitement with personal curiosity. "Brooks, I don't know what just happened here, but I think it might be the best thing that's happened to this operation in years." "That woman was impressed, and people like her don't impress easily." Ryden nodded, but his thoughts were already turning to the complications this attention might bring to the carefully structured life he had built. He had stepped out of the shadows to solve a problem, and now there was no going back to the comfortable anonymity he had maintained for 3 years. That evening, as he helped Lily with her homework, she looked up at him with the intuitive perception that children sometimes possessed. "Something different happened today, didn't it, Dad?" He paused in reviewing her math problems, struck by how easily she had read the change in him. "Maybe," he said. "Sometimes things happen that we don't expect, good things or bad things." "I don't know yet, sweetheart." "I guess we'll find out." The call came 2 days later, while Ryden was helping Lily practice reading at their kitchen table. She was working through a chapter book about a girl who could talk to animals, her finger tracking under each word as she sounded out the more difficult passages. "Ryden Brooks," he answered, stepping into the living room to avoid disturbing her concentration. "Mr. Brooks, this is Keiko Nakamura. I hope I'm not calling at an inconvenient time." Her voice carried the same professional precision he remembered, but there was something more personal in her tone, a warmth that hadn't been present during the formal business interaction at the base. "No, it's fine," he said, glancing back at Lily, who was completely absorbed in her book. "How can I help you?" "I would like to offer you a position as cultural liaison for our American expansion project. The role would involve coordinating between our Japanese operations team and your military logistics facility, ensuring that both sides understand each other's requirements and expectations." Ryden was quiet for a moment, processing the implications. A liaison position would mean more money, certainly, but it would also mean stepping fully into the spotlight he had spent 3 years avoiding. It would mean questions about his background, explanations about skills and experiences he preferred to keep private. "I appreciate the offer," he said carefully, "but I'm not sure I'm the right person for that kind of responsibility. Mr. Brooks, I've been in business for 15 years, and I've learned to recognize capability when I see it. Your understanding of our culture and requirements is exactly what this project needs. More importantly, you demonstrated the kind of calm competence that comes from real experience." There was a pause, and when she continued, her voice carried a note of genuine curiosity. "May I ask what your military background was? It's clear that your time in Japan involved more than basic language study." Ryden looked out their small living room window at the desert evening, watching the last light fade behind the mountains. This was the moment he had been dreading and expecting in equal measure, when his carefully constructed privacy would collide with professional opportunity. "Special operations," he said simply. "Cultural integration and liaison work, mostly in East Asia." "I see." Her tone suggested she understood more than he had explicitly stated. "And you left the military to work in cargo operations?" "I had family responsibilities," he said, which was true without being complete. "Yes, Sergeant Garrison mentioned that you have a daughter. That must make these kinds of career decisions more complex." There was understanding in her voice, the recognition of someone who had also faced the challenge of balancing professional opportunity with personal obligations. It made him wonder about her own story, the path that had led her to become one of the most successful businesswomen in Japan. "The position would offer significant financial benefits," she continued. "Health insurance, education assistance, opportunities for advancement. And the work would be based primarily at Nellis, so you wouldn't be traveling extensively." Ryden found himself considering the offer more seriously than he had expected. The money would mean security for Lily, opportunities he couldn't provide on a cargo handler's salary, college funds, better housing, the kinds of advantages that could shape her entire future. "Can I think about it?" he asked. "Of course. But I should mention that I'll be returning to Japan next week to finalize our expansion plans. If you're interested, I would need your decision by Friday, so we can discuss the details before I leave." After they hung up, Ryden sat on the couch and tried to imagine what accepting the position would mean. More responsibility, certainly. More attention. More opportunities for people to ask questions about his past that he wasn't ready to answer, but it would also mean providing better for Lily. And perhaps more importantly, it would mean using skills that had been gathering dust for 3 years. The cultural knowledge, the language abilities, the understanding of complex operational requirements, All of it had been earned through years of difficult service, and it felt somehow wrong to let it waste away in the name of maintaining a comfortable anonymity. "Dad?" Lily appeared beside the couch, her book closed with a finger marking her place. "Was that about work?" "Maybe a new job," he said, making room for her to sit beside him. "What do you think about that?" She curled up against his side with the easy affection of childhood, considering the question with her characteristic seriousness. "Would it make you happy?" The question caught him off guard. In 3 years, he had focused so entirely on providing stability and security that he had rarely considered happiness as a relevant factor in his decision-making. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but it might mean better things for you. A better place to live, maybe. More opportunities." "I like our place," she said, but without defensiveness. It was simply a statement of contentment with what they had built together. "I know you do, sweetheart, and we're not going anywhere. But sometimes new opportunities come along that could make life better, even when what we have is already good." She nodded against his shoulder, and he could feel her thinking through the implications in the way that children did, not with adult anxiety about change and complications, but with simple acceptance that life sometimes shifted in unexpected directions. The next morning, Garrison called him into the office before the morning shift began. The small administrative space was cluttered with schedules, shipping manifests and coffee-stained paperwork, but Garrison had clearly made an effort to organize things for their conversation. "Brooks, I heard from Nakamura Industries yesterday. They want to offer you a position as their cultural liaison." Ryden nodded, unsurprised that word had traveled quickly through official channels. "I want you to know that while I hate to lose you from the regular crew, this is the kind of opportunity that doesn't come along often. The pay grade would put you in management level, and frankly, you've got skills that are being wasted loading cargo." Garrison leaned back in his chair, studying Ryden's face with the experienced eye of someone who had managed personnel for 2 decades. "I'm guessing your military service involved more than you've let on around here." "Some," Ryden acknowledged. "Well, whatever it was, it prepared you for something bigger than what you've been doing. And I think you know that." The truth was, Ryden did know that. Every day he spent loading cargo and maintaining careful anonymity. He was aware of capabilities going unused, knowledge gathering dust. It had been a necessary healing period after losing Yuki, a time when simple, physical work had been exactly what he needed to maintain his sanity and focus on raising his daughter. But 3 years was long enough to grieve in the shadows. Lily was growing up, developing her own questions about her heritage and her father's mysterious past. Perhaps it was time to step back into the world where his skills and experience could make a meaningful difference. "If I take the position," he said to Garrison, "what happens to my place on the crew?" "The liaison role would be based here, so you'd still be part of the operation, just in a different capacity. And honestly, having someone with your background coordinating with international clients could benefit everyone." That afternoon, Ryden made his decision. He called Keiko's office and accepted the position, feeling something like relief as he spoke the words aloud. It was time to stop hiding from his own capabilities. The news spread quickly through the cargo crew, generating a mixture of congratulations and curiosity. The men he had worked alongside for 3 years suddenly saw him differently, not as someone leaving them behind, but as someone whose hidden depths had finally been recognized and properly valued. But perhaps the most important reaction came from Lily that evening, when he explained that he would be taking on new responsibilities at work. "Does this mean you'll teach me more Japanese words?" she asked, her eyes lighting up with excitement. "If you want to learn them," he said, surprised by how much her enthusiasm meant to him. "I do. I want to understand the stories Mom would have told me." And in that moment, Ryden realized that accepting the liaison position wasn't just about professional advancement or financial security. It was about honoring the memory of his wife by sharing the culture she had loved with the daughter they had created together. It was about stepping out of the shadows and back into the light, where healing could finally begin to look like hope. Keiko arrived at Ryden's apartment on a Saturday afternoon, carrying a leather briefcase and wearing casual clothes that somehow still managed to look expensive. She had called that morning to ask if they could discuss project details in a more informal setting, explaining that some conversations were better conducted away from the formal atmosphere of military facilities. Lily answered the door when Keiko knocked, her natural curiosity overcoming any shyness about meeting her father's new business associate. "Your Japanese is remarkably fluent, Mr. Brooks, more than what most military personnel acquire through basic cultural training. Did you study the language extensively during your service?" Ryden was quiet for a moment, aware that Lily was listening, and that his answer would shape how much of his past he was willing to reveal in front of his daughter. "I was married to a Japanese woman," he said finally. "She taught me properly, not just the language, but the cultural context behind it." "I see." Keiko's tone carried gentle understanding. "And she passed away? Cancer." 3 years ago." The simple statement hung in the air, explaining more than lengthy descriptions could have conveyed. It explained his presence in Nevada, his careful isolation, his reluctance to step back into professional roles that might require him to revisit memories he had been managing through deliberate distance. "I'm sorry," Keiko said, and her sympathy sounded genuine rather than merely polite. "That must have been very difficult, especially with a young child." Lily had stopped coloring and was watching the adult conversation with the serious attention she brought to discussions about her mother. She had learned to read the emotional currents in such conversations, understanding that her father's careful words carried weight beyond their surface meaning. "Mom taught me some Japanese words too," Lily said, her voice carrying the careful pride of a child sharing something precious. "But I don't remember them very well." Keiko turned her attention fully to Lily, her professional demeanor shifting to something warmer and more personal. "What words do you remember?" Lily thought for a moment, then said hesitantly, "Aishiteru." "Mom said it meant something important." "It means I love you," Keiko said softly. "A very special way to say it, usually reserved for family." Lily nodded, satisfied with the confirmation. "She used to say it when she tucked me in at night." Ryden felt the familiar ache that came with these references to Yuki's presence in their daily life. The memories were precious but sharp, reminders of the completeness they had briefly possessed and lost. Keiko seemed to sense the emotional weight of the moment. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a small, wrapped package. "I brought something for you." "Lily, if your father says it's all right." Ryden nodded his permission, curious about what she might have selected for a child she had just met. Lily unwrapped the package carefully, revealing a set of origami paper in bright colors, along with a small instruction book written in both Japanese and English. "Origami is the art of paper folding," Keiko explained. "It's something many Japanese children learn. Would you like me to show you how to make a crane?" For the next 30 minutes, business discussions were set aside, while Keiko patiently guided Lily through the steps of creating her first paper crane. Her hands moved with practiced precision, demonstrating folds and creases while explaining the symbolism behind the traditional design. "In Japan, we believe that if you fold 1,000 paper cranes, you can make a wish come true," she told Lily, as the small bird took shape in the girl's careful hands. "What would you wish for?" Lily asked, concentrating intensely on matching the folds Keiko had shown her. The question seemed to catch Keiko off guard, as if she hadn't considered her own wishes in quite some time. She glanced at Ryden, then back at the paper crane taking shape in Lily's hands. "I think I would wish for the people I care about to be happy," she said thoughtfully. Ryden watched the interaction with growing appreciation for Keiko's natural way with his daughter. There was nothing forced or performative about her attention to Lily. She seemed genuinely engaged with the child's questions and excited by her enthusiasm for learning about Japanese culture. When the crane was complete, Lily held it up triumphantly, her face glowing with accomplishment. "It's beautiful. Can we make more?" "Of course." Practice makes perfect, and each one you make will be better than the last. As they worked on a second crane, Keiko and Ryden continued their business discussion, but the formal atmosphere had completely dissolved. The conversation flowed naturally between project details and personal observations, creating a comfortable intimacy that surprised Ryden with its naturalness. I should mention that the Japanese business culture places great emphasis on relationships and trust, Keiko said, while helping Lily with a particularly tricky fold. Your role would involve more than technical coordination. You would be representing both sides to each other, helping them understand not just what is needed, but why it matters. I understand, Ryden said. Cultural translation is often more important than literal translation. Exactly, she looked at him with approval. That understanding is precisely why I believe you're the right person for this position. As the afternoon progressed, Ryden found himself relaxing in ways he hadn't experienced in years. The combination of meaningful professional discussion and genuine personal connection created a sense of possibility that he had almost forgotten could exist. When Keiko finally prepared to leave, Lily hugged her goodbye with the unself-conscious affection of childhood. "Will you come visit us again?" she asked. "I hope so," Keiko said, glancing at Ryden for confirmation. "If your father doesn't mind." "I don't mind," Ryden said, and realized he meant it completely. After Keiko left, Lily spent the evening working on origami cranes while Ryden prepared dinner. The small paper birds accumulated on the kitchen table, each one slightly more refined than the last, evidence of his daughter's determination to master the art she had been introduced to that afternoon. "Dad," she said as they ate dinner, "I like her." "Keiko?" "Yes, she's nice and she knows about Mom's country. She makes me feel like the Japanese part of me is something good." The comment struck Ryden with unexpected force. In his efforts to protect Lily from the pain of loss, he realized he might have inadvertently minimized the importance of her cultural heritage. Yuki's death had been so devastating that he had avoided anything that might intensify the grief, including regular references to the culture and traditions that had been such an important part of her identity. "It is something good, sweetheart. Your mother's culture is a part of who you are, and that's something to be proud of." Lily nodded seriously, then returned to her crane folding with renewed focus. "Maybe I really can make 1,000 of them." "Maybe you can," Ryden agreed. Watching his daughter's careful hands shape paper into art and hope into possibility. That night, after Lily had gone to bed, Ryden sat on the couch and reflected on how much had changed in a single afternoon. A business meeting had evolved into something more personal and meaningful, opening doors he had thought were permanently closed. For the first time in 3 years, he found himself looking forward to tomorrow with something that felt remarkably like anticipation. "You must be Lily," Keiko said, crouching down to meet the girl at eye level. "Your father has told me wonderful things about you. Are you really from Japan?" Lily asked with the direct honesty that 8-year-olds brought to questions that adults might find awkward. "Yes, I am. From Tokyo. Have you ever wanted to visit Japan?" Lily nodded enthusiastically. "Dad says Mom was from there, and that it has cherry blossoms and temples and mountains with snow." Something shifted in Keiko's expression, a softening that suggested she understood more about the family's history than had been explicitly discussed. She glanced up at Ryden, who was watching the interaction with careful attention. "All of those things are true," Keiko said gently. "Maybe someday you'll get to see them for yourself." They settled in the small living room, Keiko declining offers of coffee but accepting a glass of water. Lily positioned herself at the kitchen table with her coloring books, close enough to observe but politely giving the adults space for their conversation. "I wanted to discuss the scope of your role in more detail," Keiko began, opening her briefcase and extracting a folder of documents. "But first, I hope you don't mind my saying that your daughter is lovely. You've done well raising her on your own." Ryden felt the familiar tightening in his chest that came whenever the subject of single parenthood arose. "She's a good kid. Makes it easier. Still, It can't have been simple managing work and family responsibilities without help. There was something in her tone that suggested personal understanding rather than mere sympathy. Keiko's professional manner carried undertones of someone who had also navigated the complexities of building a life while carrying private burdens. "We manage," he said simply, then shifted the conversation back to safer ground. "What did you want to discuss about the position?" Keiko spread several documents across the coffee table, organizational charts, project timelines, budget allocations that made Ryden's current salary look insignificant. "The liaison role will require you to interface between our Japanese operations team and various American military and civilian logistics providers. Your cultural knowledge will be essential, but so will your operational experience. I suspect your military background prepared you for exactly this kind of coordination work." Ryden studied the documents, noting the scope and complexity of the project. Kuroda Industries was planning a significant expansion into American markets, requiring the establishment of supply chains, distribution networks, and partnerships that would generate hundreds of millions of dollars in economic activity. "This is much larger than I expected," he said. "We believe in thinking comprehensively. Half measures rarely succeed in international business." She paused, watching his face as he processed the information. "I should mention that the position would likely require some travel to Japan for training and relationship building with our headquarters staff." The mention of returning to Japan created a complex, emotional response that Ryden tried to keep from showing. Japan meant memories of Yuki, places they had shared, experiences that were both precious and painful. But it also represented the professional world where his skills had been forged, where his understanding of cultural dynamics had been earned through years of difficult and important work. "How much travel?" he asked. "Initially, perhaps 2 weeks for orientation and introduction to our teams. After that, probably quarterly visits for ongoing coordination. All expenses paid, of course, and we would ensure that your family responsibilities are accommodated." Lily looked up from her coloring book at the mention of travel. "Would I get to come sometimes?" Keiko smiled at the question. "That might be possible, depending on the circumstances." "Would you like to visit Japan?" "Yes." Lily's enthusiasm was immediate and genuine. "I want to see where Mom grew up and learn to speak Japanese like Dad." The casual reference to Ryden's language skills prompted Keiko to ask a question that had clearly been on her mind since their first meeting. The logistics crisis emerged on a Tuesday morning when Keiko's phone call woke Ryden at 5:30 a.m. Her voice carried the controlled tension of someone managing a significant professional emergency. "Ryden, I need your help. We have a major problem with the first shipment phase, and I'm not getting clear answers from anyone on the American side." He was immediately alert, the old military training that never completely faded, bringing him to full consciousness within seconds. "What kind of problem?" "Regulatory compliance issues. The shipping manifests don't match the customs documentation, and there are questions about security protocols that could delay everything by weeks. I'm flying in today, but I need someone who understands both systems to help sort this out." Ryden was already reaching for his clothes, his mind shifting into the analytical mode that had served him well during his military career. Complex logistics problems required methodical thinking and the ability to see connections that weren't immediately obvious. "I'll meet you at the base," he said. "Can you send me the documentation so I can review it beforehand?" "Already done. Check your email." "And Ryden, thank you. I know this isn't what you signed up for." After she hung up, Ryden spent an hour reviewing the electronic documents she had forwarded, his coffee growing cold as he traced through the regulatory requirements and identified the sources of confusion. The problems were significant but solvable, requiring someone who understood both the Japanese export requirements and American import protocols. By the time he arrived at the base, he had developed a preliminary plan for addressing the issues. But he also recognized that implementing the solution would require extended collaboration with Keiko, late-night work sessions, and the kind of intensive professional partnership he hadn't experienced since his military service. Keiko's plane landed at noon, and she arrived at the cargo facility with the focused energy of someone who had spent the flight preparing for battle. She wore a dark suit that suggested serious business, and her expression carried the weight of millions of dollars in potential delays and complications. "Show me everything," she said without preamble, following Ryden to the conference room where he had spread out printed copies of all the relevant documentation. For the next 4 hours, they worked through the regulatory maze together, identifying discrepancies, tracing bureaucratic requirements, and developing workarounds for the most problematic issues. Ryden's military experience with international operations proved invaluable, as did his understanding of how American and Japanese systems could interface despite their fundamental differences in approach. What struck him most was Keiko's combination of business acuity and practical, problem-solving ability. She didn't just understand the financial implications of delays. She grasped the technical details of shipping protocols and regulatory requirements. More importantly, she listened to his suggestions with genuine respect, treating him as an equal partner in developing solutions rather than simply an employee following instructions. "You have an interesting way of thinking through these problems," she said during a brief break when they had ordered sandwiches to be delivered to the conference room. "Very systematic, but also creative. Where did you learn to approach complex logistics this way?" "Special operations requires a lot of coordination between different agencies and international partners," he said. "You learn to find ways to make incompatible systems work together." "What kind of operations?" The question came naturally in the context of their professional collaboration, but Ryden still felt the familiar hesitation about revealing details of his military service. Cultural liaison work mostly, helping American forces understand local customs and requirements, and helping local partners understand American capabilities and limitations. Keiko nodded thoughtfully. "That explains your sensitivity to the cultural aspects of business relationships. Most Americans approach international commerce as if it's simply a matter of translating contracts and adjusting prices." "Culture shapes everything," Ryden said. "How people think about time, relationships, obligations, success. You can't separate business from cultural context." "Exactly." She looked at him with approval that felt personally meaningful rather than merely professional. "That understanding is rare, especially among men who have primarily worked in military environments." The comment surprised him. "What do you mean?" "Military culture tends to emphasize hierarchy and direct communication. But successful international business requires the ability to navigate subtlety, to understand what people aren't saying as much as what they are saying. It's a different kind of intelligence." Ryden considered this, recognizing the truth in her observation. His success in special operations had come largely from his ability to adapt to different cultural contexts, to understand motivations and concerns that weren't explicitly stated. It was a skill set that had served him well in Japan, particularly in his relationship with Yuki, who had appreciated his willingness to learn not just her language, but the cultural assumptions behind it. "My wife taught me a lot about that," he said. "She was very patient with my American tendency to want everything explained directly." "Tell me about her," Keiko said gently. The request caught him off guard. In 3 years, no one had asked him to describe Yuki, to share memories of who she had been as a person, rather than simply acknowledging that he had suffered a loss. Most people seemed to understand that the subject was too painful for casual conversation, but something about the moment, the quiet conference room, the sense of professional partnership, Keiko's genuine interest, made the sharing feel natural rather than intrusive. "She was a translator," he said. "We met when I was working with Japanese self-defense forces on a joint training exercise. She was helping with the language barriers, and I was helping with cultural coordination. We spent a lot of time together, trying to figure out how to make two very different military systems work together." That sounds like the foundation for understanding each other in deeper ways. It was. She saw things I missed, understood connections I couldn't see, and she was patient with my questions, even when they revealed how little I really knew about anything important. Keiko smiled. The best teachers usually are patient with their students, especially when the students are genuinely trying to learn. They returned to work, but the personal conversation had shifted something between them. The professional collaboration continued, but it was now layered with a sense of personal connection that made the work feel less like problem-solving and more like partnership. By 8 o'clock that evening, they had developed a comprehensive solution to the regulatory issues, complete with revised documentation and a timeline for implementation. The work had been intensive and challenging, but also satisfying in ways that Ryden hadn't experienced since his military service. "I need to call Lily," he said, glancing at his watch. "Let her know I'll be late for dinner." "Of course. And please give her my regards. I enjoyed meeting her very much." When Ryden called home, Lily answered with the slightly worried tone she used when his schedule deviated from their normal routine. "I'm fine, sweetheart," he assured her. "Just working late on an important project. There's leftover pizza in the refrigerator for dinner, and I'll be home by 9. Is Keiko there?" Lily asked with the intuitive perception that had characterized her questions about his work since the liaison position began. "Yes, she's here. We're solving some complicated problems together. Tell her I made 3 more cranes today, and I think they're getting better." Ryden smiled, touched by his daughter's desire to share her accomplishments with someone who had shown genuine interest in her efforts. "I'll tell her," he promised. When he relayed the message, Keiko's face lit up with genuine pleasure. "She's working hard on those cranes. That kind of persistence is admirable in someone so young." "She gets that from her mother," Ryden said. "Yuki never gave up on anything she thought was important. And from her father." "I think," Keiko said quietly. The comment hung in the air between them, carrying implications that neither of them was quite ready to address directly. But the acknowledgement was there, the recognition of qualities beyond professional competence, the suggestion of personal worth that extended into areas Ryden had almost forgotten about himself. As they packed up their work materials, preparing to continue the next day, Ryden found himself looking forward to tomorrow's collaboration with something that felt distinctly different from simple professional obligation. For the first time in 3 years, he was experiencing the satisfaction that came from using his skills alongside someone who truly understood their value. The dinner invitation came 3 weeks later, after they had successfully resolved the shipping crisis and established a smooth working rhythm for the ongoing project. Keiko had been staying at a hotel near the base during her extended visit, but she mentioned feeling disconnected from normal life while living out of a suitcase and eating restaurant meals. "Would it be inappropriate for me to cook dinner for you and Lily?" she asked during one of their afternoon planning sessions. "I've been craving home cooking, and I thought perhaps I could share some Japanese dishes with both of you." Ryden hesitated, not from lack of interest, but from the awareness that accepting would represent a significant shift in their relationship. Professional collaboration was one thing. Sharing meals in his home with his daughter was distinctly more personal territory. "Lily would love that," he said finally, realizing that his daughter's enthusiasm for Japanese culture made the invitation almost impossible to decline graciously. "Wonderful. Is Saturday evening convenient? I can stop at the Asian market in Las Vegas and get proper ingredients." Saturday afternoon found Ryden cleaning their small apartment with more attention to detail than he usually devoted to household maintenance. Not because Keiko would judge them for normal living, but because having a guest felt significant after 3 years of maintaining their privacy so carefully. Lily helped with excitement that bordered on vibration, arranging her growing collection of origami cranes on the kitchen table and practicing the few Japanese phrases Keiko had been teaching her during their brief interactions at the base. "Do I look okay, Dad?" she asked, spinning in the dress she had selected for the occasion, a simple blue one that had been her favorite for special events since the beginning of the school year. "You look perfect." "Sweetheart." Keiko arrived at 6 with cloth shopping bags full of ingredients and a warm smile that suggested she was as excited about the evening as Lily was. She had traded her usual business attire for casual clothes, dark jeans and a soft sweater that made her look younger and more relaxed than Ryden had seen her before. "I hope you don't mind that I bought enough food for an army," she said, setting the bags on the kitchen counter. "I got a little carried away at the market." "What are we making?" Lily asked, bouncing on her toes with anticipation. "Chicken teriyaki, rice, and miso soup. And for dessert, mochi ice cream, if I can figure out how to make it properly in an American kitchen." For the next 2 hours, Ryden's small kitchen became a cultural exchange laboratory. Keiko moved with confident familiarity, seasoning and stirring while explaining the reasoning behind each ingredient and technique. Lily served as eager assistant, carefully measuring rice and learning to use chopsticks properly. Ryden found himself relegated to sous chef duties, chopping vegetables under Keiko's patient instruction and discovering that cooking could be meditative rather than simply functional when approached. "With the right attitude and company, your knife skills are quite good," Keiko observed as he worked through a pile of carrots with military precision. "Field kitchens teach you to be efficient," he said. "Is that where you learned to cook?" "Mostly. Though Yuki tried to teach me properly before." He stopped, realizing he had been about to reference her illness, a subject he tried to avoid in front of Lily. Keiko seemed to understand his hesitation. She glanced at Lily, who was concentrating intensely on stirring the miso soup, then continued the conversation in a way that acknowledged his wife without dwelling on her loss. She must have been a good teacher. Japanese cooking requires patience and attention to detail. She was very patient, Ryden said, with cooking and everything else. "May I ask, do you have any of her recipes?" The question surprised him with its directness, but also with how natural it felt coming from Keiko. Over the weeks of working together, she had developed a way of asking personal questions that felt like genuine interest rather than intrusion. "A few," he said, "written in both Japanese and English in case I forgot the techniques. Would it be all right if I looked at one? I'd love to see how she adapted traditional recipes for an American kitchen." Ryden hesitated for only a moment before retrieving a small wooden recipe box from one of the kitchen cabinets. It was one of the few things he had kept easily accessible, though he hadn't opened it since the first lonely months after Yuki's death, when he had tried unsuccessfully to recreate her cooking for Lily. Keiko received the box with obvious reverence, handling it as if she understood that it contained more than mere cooking instructions. She examined several of the recipe cards, her expression growing thoughtful as she read Yuki's careful handwriting in both languages. "Her Japanese calligraphy is beautiful," she said softly. "And look, she annotated everything with notes about American ingredient substitutions and cooking methods. She really wanted to make sure you could continue making these dishes." "I tried," Ryden said, "but I was never very good at it. Everything I made tasted wrong somehow." "Cooking is like language," Keiko said, still studying the recipe cards. "It's not just about following the rules. You have to understand the spirit behind the techniques. Would you like me to help you learn to make some of these properly?" The offer was generous and personal in ways that went far beyond their professional relationship. It also represented a bridge between his past with Yuki and his present circumstances that he hadn't known how to build on his own. "I'd like that," he said. Lily looked up from her soup-stirring duties with excitement. "Can I help too?" "Of course," Keiko said. "These are your mother's recipes. They're part of your heritage." When dinner was ready, they gathered around the small kitchen table, which had been set with an interesting mixture of American plates and the chopsticks Keiko had brought. The food was delicious, but more than that, it filled the apartment with aromas that reminded Ryden powerfully of the year he had spent learning to call Japan home. "This tastes just like Mom's cooking," Lily said, after her first bite of teriyaki chicken, her voice carrying wonder rather than sadness. "That's the highest compliment I could receive," Keiko replied. As they ate, The conversation flowed naturally between practical topics and personal stories. Keiko shared anecdotes about growing up in Tokyo, the challenges of building her business, and her own experiences with cultural adaptation when she had studied in America as a young woman. "I was terribly homesick my first year in college," she admitted. "Everything seemed so different. The food, the social expectations, even the way people organized their time. I almost gave up and went home." "What changed your mind?" Ryden asked. "I met a professor who helped me understand that adaptation doesn't mean abandoning who you are. It means finding ways to be yourself in new contexts. That became the foundation for everything I did afterward in business." "That's wise," Ryden said, recognizing how the same principle had shaped his own experiences with cultural integration during his military service. After dinner, while Keiko and Lily worked on origami at the kitchen table, Ryden stood at the sink, washing dishes, and listening to their conversation about paper folding techniques and Japanese festivals. The domesticity of the scene struck him with unexpected force, not because it felt foreign, but because it felt so naturally right. For the first time since Yuki's death, he could imagine what it might be like to share his life with someone again. Not to replace what he had lost, but to build something new that honored the past while embracing the possibility of future happiness. When Keiko prepared to leave that evening, Lily hugged her goodnight with the easy affection she showed to people she trusted completely. "Will you teach us more recipes next time?" Lily asked. "I'd love to," Keiko said, then looked at Ryden with a question in her eyes. "There will be a next time," he said quietly, and felt something like peace settle into place around the admission. After Keiko left, Lily helped put away the dishes while chattering excitedly about everything she had learned about Japanese cooking and culture. But when they settled on the couch for their usual bedtime routine, her expression grew more serious. "Dad," she said, curling up against his side, "do you think Mom would be happy that we're learning about her country?" The question caught him in the space between grief and hope, but for the first time, hope felt stronger. "I think she would be very happy, sweetheart. She always wanted you to understand the beautiful parts of where she came from." Lily nodded against his shoulder, satisfied with the answer. And in the quiet evening that followed, Ryden found himself imagining possibilities he hadn't allowed himself to consider in 3 long years of careful solitude. The letter appeared on a Tuesday morning while Ryden was sorting through old clothes to donate to charity. Lily had outgrown several items, and he was using the task as an excuse to finally tackle the closet he had been avoiding for 3 years, the one that still held some of Yuki's belongings alongside his own military memorabilia. He found the letter in the breast pocket of his dress blues, the formal uniform he had worn exactly once since leaving active duty, to Yuki's funeral. The envelope was cream-colored paper with his name written in Yuki's careful script, the characters flowing with the elegant precision she had brought to everything she touched. For several minutes, he simply held the envelope, his hands trembling slightly as he recognized her handwriting. He had gone through all of her personal effects after her death, keeping some things for Lily and carefully preserving others for himself. But this letter had somehow escaped his attention, hidden in the pocket of a uniform he had never expected to wear again. Inside the envelope, 2 sheets of paper contained a message written in both Japanese and English. As if Yuki had wanted to ensure her words would be understood with perfect clarity, regardless of his emotional state, when he eventually found them. "My beloved Ryden." The letter began, "If you are reading this, then time has passed, and you have found your way to looking through the things we shared together. I hope this means you are ready to hear what I need to tell you. I know that my illness frightens you, and I know you believe that losing me will be the end of something important in your life. But I need you to understand that love doesn't end with death. It changes form, but it continues in the ways we carry each other forward. You have given me the most beautiful years of my life, and together we created Lily, who will carry the best parts of both of us into whatever future awaits her. But I need you to promise me something that I could not ask while I was still with you, because I knew you would refuse. Promise me that you will not spend the rest of your life grieving. Promise me that you will not use my memory as an excuse to avoid the possibility of loving again." Ryden had to stop reading and sit down on the edge of their bed, the letter shaking in his hands as the implications of her words settled into his understanding. "I have watched you with Lily, and I know what kind of father you will be, patient, devoted, completely committed to her happiness. But she needs to see that love is possible, that relationships can bring joy rather than only loss. She needs to understand that opening your heart to someone doesn't diminish what we had together. I need you to teach her that love multiplies rather than divides, that finding happiness again doesn't mean forgetting what came before. And I need you to learn this lesson yourself, because you deserve more than a life spent managing grief. When the time comes, and you will know when it comes, please don't let guilt prevent you from embracing what could make you both happy. Don't let my memory become a burden that keeps you from living fully. I loved you with everything I had, and because I loved you, I want your life to be filled with as much happiness as possible. That might include someone new who can appreciate the wonderful man I was lucky enough to marry. Someone who can be a partner to you and perhaps a mother figure to Lily. Trust yourself to know when that person appears. Trust your heart to make room for new love without pushing out the old. And trust that wherever I am, I will be grateful that you chose life over sorrow. All my love. Always and in all ways. Yuki Ryden read the letter 3 times, each reading revealing new layers of meaning and intention. The timing of its discovery felt impossibly perfect. Or perhaps, he realized, Yuki had understood him well enough to know exactly when he would need to hear these words. The letter changed everything and nothing simultaneously. His love for Yuki remained unchanged, but her explicit permission to move forward transformed guilt into possibility, transformed loyalty into freedom. She had given him what he couldn't give himself, absolution, from the belief that happiness would represent betrayal. That evening, Keiko called, as she often did now, their conversations having evolved from purely professional coordination to something that included personal check-ins and shared observations about their days. "You sound different. Tonight," she said after they had discussed the week's shipping schedules. "More relaxed somehow. I found something today," he said carefully. "A letter from Yuki that I didn't know existed. She wrote it before she died, knowing I would find it eventually. What did it say?" Keiko's voice carried gentle curiosity rather than intrusion. "That she wanted me to be happy. That she wanted me to find love again when the time was right." The statement hung between them over the phone connection, both of them understanding its implications for their growing relationship. "How do you feel about that?" Keiko asked quietly. "Like I've been given permission to stop feeling guilty about something I didn't even realize I was feeling guilty about." "And what were you feeling guilty about?" Ryden was quiet for a long moment, processing emotions he was only beginning to understand clearly. "About enjoying your company so much," he said finally. "About looking forward to seeing you. About the way I feel when we work together, or when you're here with Lily and me. About the possibility that I might be falling in love again." The admission surprised him with its completeness. He hadn't planned to be so direct, but Yuki's letter had somehow freed him from the careful emotional management that had characterized his interactions with everyone for 3 years. "Ryden," Keiko said, her voice soft with emotion. "I know it's complicated," he continued. "Your life is in Japan, your business, your family. And I have Lily to consider, and a job that I'm just learning to do properly. But I need you to know that what I feel for you isn't something I was expecting or looking for. It just happened, despite all my efforts to keep things professional. I've been falling in love with you too," she said quietly. "With your gentleness and your strength, with the way you are with Lily, with your intelligence and your cultural sensitivity. But I was afraid to say anything, because I didn't want to complicate things for you or make you feel pressured." "What would it mean," he asked, "if we acknowledged these feelings officially? Your business is international, but your life is established in Japan." "I don't know," she said honestly. But I know that I've never felt more comfortable with anyone, never found someone who understood both the professional and personal aspects of who I am. I know that spending time with you and Lily feels more like home than anything I've experienced in years. They talked for another hour, exploring possibilities and acknowledging complications. The conversation was honest and careful, both of them understanding that they were discussing something that could reshape both their lives fundamentally. The next morning, Ryden made a decision that would have been impossible without Yuki's letter. He called Keiko and asked if she would like to take a weekend trip with him and Lily, not for business, but as the family unit they were beginning to become. "I'd love that," she said, her voice carrying warmth and excitement that confirmed what they had both been feeling but hadn't quite dared to name. When he told Lily about the planned weekend trip, she responded with enthusiasm that suggested she had been hoping for exactly this development. "Are you and Keiko going to be girlfriend and boyfriend now?" she asked with the directness that 8-year-olds brought to relationship status questions. "Maybe, sweetheart. How would you feel about that?" Lily considered the question with her characteristic seriousness. "I think Mom would like her," she said finally. "And I like her too. She makes you smile more, and she teaches me things about where Mom came from." That night, before going to sleep, Ryden read Yuki's letter one more time. But instead of feeling the sharp pain of loss, he felt something closer to gratitude, for the love they had shared, for the daughter they had created together, and for her wisdom in understanding that happiness could expand rather than replace what had come before. For the first time since her death, he fell asleep thinking about the future with anticipation rather than simply acceptance. The letter had given him permission to stop surviving and start living again, and he intended to honor that gift by embracing whatever possibilities awaited them. The urgent phone call came at 3 a.m. on a Wednesday, pulling Ryden from deep sleep with the kind of jarring alarm that immediately suggested serious trouble. "Ryden, I'm sorry to wake you, but I need your help." Keiko's voice carried strain and exhaustion that he had never heard before. "There's a crisis with my company in Japan, and I need to return immediately. It's very serious." He was instantly alert, his mind shifting to the focused clarity that crisis situations demanded. "What kind of crisis?" "A hostile takeover attempt. While I've been in America working on the expansion project, a consortium of competitors has been quietly acquiring shares and building a case that my international focus has made me neglectful of domestic operations. The board is meeting tomorrow to discuss removing me as CEO. Ryden understood immediately that this wasn't simply a business disagreement, but a coordinated attack designed to exploit her physical absence from Japan. "How much support do you have on the board?" "Not enough. The consortium has been spreading rumors about failed American ventures and questioning my judgment. They're portraying the expansion as reckless spending rather than strategic growth." Her voice carried the controlled desperation of someone who had built something precious and was watching it slip away. "What can I do to help?" "I need to leave for Tokyo today, but the American expansion project is at a critical phase. If I abandon it now, it proves their point about divided loyalties. But if I stay to manage it, I lose my company." Ryden was quiet for a moment, processing the implications. Then an idea began to form. Audacious and complicated, but perhaps the only solution that could address both problems simultaneously. "What if you didn't have to choose?" he said. "What if I came with you to Japan? I could help present the American project as a success rather than a distraction. Demonstrate that your international focus has created valuable partnerships rather than neglecting domestic operations." "Ryden, that's generous. But this is corporate warfare at the highest levels. These people will attack any perceived weakness, and having a foreign business partner might make things worse rather than better." "Not a foreign partner," he corrected. "An American military liaison with special operations background and deep cultural understanding. Someone whose presence validates your international strategy rather than undermining your domestic credibility." There was silence on the phone as Keiko considered the possibility. When she spoke again, her voice carried cautious hope. It could work. If you were introduced properly, with the right context about your background and our professional collaboration, it might actually strengthen my position. But it would mean leaving everything here, possibly for weeks. I understand. But Lily has always wanted to visit Japan, and this might be the perfect opportunity for her to see her mother's homeland. You want to bring Lily? Keiko's surprise was evident. She's part of this too, isn't she? Part of what we're building together. Besides, she might be the secret weapon you don't realize you need. The next 12 hours passed in a whirlwind of preparation and logistics. Garrison expedited leave paperwork with the efficiency of someone who understood that unusual circumstances required unusual solutions. Lily approached the prospect of traveling to Japan with excitement tempered by awareness that this was more than a vacation. This was about protecting something important to people she cared about. Are we going to help save Keiko's company? She asked while packing her small suitcase with careful attention to including her growing collection of origami cranes. We're going to try, sweetheart. Sometimes the best way to help someone is simply to stand with them when things get difficult. Like a family. The question struck him with its simple clarity. Yes, like a family. The flight to Tokyo was Lily's first time leaving the continental United States, and her wonder at the experience provided welcome distraction from the business crisis that awaited them. Keiko sat beside them, alternating between periods of focused preparation, reviewing financial documents and strategic presentations, and moments of genuine engagement with Lily's questions about Japanese culture and customs. Will I be able to understand people when they talk? Lily asked as their plane descended toward Narita Airport. Some of it, Keiko assured her. And I'll help translate anything important. But you might be surprised how much you pick up just from watching and listening. Tokyo struck Ryden with the force of memory and change combined. The city was both exactly as he remembered and completely transformed. 3 years of growth and development layered over the cultural foundations that had shaped his understanding of Japan during his military service. But more than the physical changes, returning to Japan with Keiko and Lily felt like completing a circle that had been broken by loss and was now being rebuilt through love and partnership. They stayed in Keiko's family home in a traditional neighborhood where modern Tokyo life existed, alongside customs that had endured for generations. Keiko's parents, Hiroshi and Emiko, received them with the formal politeness that Japanese culture demanded. But Ryden recognized the subtle signs of approval in their treatment of him and their immediate affection for Lily. "Your Japanese is very good," Hiroshi observed during their first dinner together, speaking in English out of courtesy, but clearly impressed by Ryden's cultural sensitivity. "Where did you learn to bow properly?" "Your daughter's late wife taught him," Lily said innocently, not understanding that she was providing information that recontextualized Ryden's presence in their home. Emiko's expression shifted to something warmer and more personal. "You were married to a Japanese woman?" "Yuki Tanaka," Ryden said quietly. "From Kyoto. She died 3 years ago. The revelation transformed the family dynamics completely. What had been polite acceptance became genuine welcome. The recognition that Ryden's understanding of their culture came from love and loss, rather than mere professional necessity. Lily's mixed heritage, which had been obvious from her features but unexplained, now made perfect sense within the context of a family story that honored both her cultures. That evening, while Lily slept and Keiko worked late preparing for the next day's board meeting, Ryden walked through the traditional garden behind her family home. The space was small but perfectly designed, every element chosen and placed with the aesthetic precision that Japanese culture brought to the integration of nature and human habitation. Keiko found him there an hour later, sitting on a stone bench and contemplating the careful arrangement of rocks and plants that created beauty from simplicity. "Nervous about tomorrow?" he asked as she settled beside him. "Terrified," she admitted. I've spent 15 years building this company, and it could all disappear in a single board meeting. What's the worst-case scenario? They remove me as CEO, install someone who will abandon the international expansion, and reduce the company to a domestic operation with limited growth potential. Everything I've worked for becomes meaningless. Ryden was quiet for a moment, thinking through the strategic elements of the situation with the analytical approach that had served him well in military planning. Or, he said finally, they discover that your international strategy has created partnerships and opportunities they hadn't fully understood. They realize that having someone with your cultural sensitivity and global perspective gives them competitive advantages they can't replicate easily. That's the best-case scenario. But it requires convincing people who have already decided that I've made mistakes. Then we don't try to convince them you haven't made mistakes. We show them that your mistakes led to innovations and partnerships that are more valuable than playing it safe would have been. Keiko looked at him with the expression of someone recognizing a perspective she hadn't considered. What do you mean? Military strategy teaches you that sometimes the most unconventional approaches are the most effective ones. Your competitors expect you to defend your decisions. Instead, we go on the offensive. We show them what they'll lose if they replace you, not just what you've accomplished. They spent the next 2 hours developing a presentation strategy that reframed the entire narrative. Instead of defending her expansion into American markets, they would demonstrate how her cultural bridging had created opportunities that purely domestic competitors couldn't access. Instead of apologizing for time spent outside Japan, they would show how that time had built relationships and understanding that would benefit the company for decades. When they finally returned to the house, Lily was awake, sitting at the kitchen table with Emiko and working on origami, with the patient instruction of someone who'd been teaching the art form for 60 years. "Look, Dad," Lily said, holding up a paper crane that was more perfectly formed than any she had created before. "Emiko-san taught me the secret to making the wings balance properly." "Beautiful," Ryden said, and meant it in ways that extended far beyond the paper sculpture. "Lily has very good hands for this work," Emiko observed. "Patient and careful, like her father." As they prepared for sleep in the guest rooms Keiko's parents had graciously provided, Ryden felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the sense of being part of something larger than his own careful, controlled world. Tomorrow would bring challenges that could reshape their futures. But tonight, they were a family, preparing to face those challenges together. "Dad," Lily said sleepily from her futon, "I think I understand now why Mom loved Japan so much. It feels like everything has meaning here, even small things." "Yes, sweetheart, it does." And as he settled into his own bed, listening to the quiet sounds of a traditional Japanese home at night, Ryden found himself looking forward to tomorrow with confidence rather than anxiety. They had work to do, but they would do it together, and that made all the difference. The boardroom at Kuroda Industries occupied the 42nd floor of a gleaming Tokyo tower, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering commanding views of the city that stretched endlessly toward distant mountains. But Ryden's attention was focused entirely on the 12 individuals seated around the polished conference table, each one representing millions of dollars in corporate influence and decades of business relationships that could determine Keiko's future with a simple vote. The hostile consortium was led by Takeshi Yamamoto, a silver-haired executive whose company had been Kuroda Industries' primary domestic competitor for over a decade. His presentation had been methodical and damaging, painting Keiko's American expansion as reckless spending that had diverted resources from profitable domestic operations. Ms. Nakamura's absence from Japan during the critical third quarter resulted in delayed responses to market changes and missed opportunities with key domestic clients. Yamamoto argued, his tone carrying the respectful formality that Japanese business culture demanded, while delivering what amounted to a professional death sentence. Ryden watched Keiko's face as she listened to the systematic dismantling of her leadership decisions. Her expression remained professionally composed, but he could see the strain in the slight tension around her eyes, the careful control of someone who understood that any display of emotion would be interpreted as weakness in this context. When Yamamoto concluded his presentation, the board chairman turned to Keiko with the grave courtesy of someone delivering an execution. "Miss Nakamura, you have the opportunity to respond to these concerns before we proceed with our deliberations." Keiko stood and moved to the presentation screen with the confident bearing that had made her one of Japan's most successful businesswomen. But Ryden could see her hands trembling slightly as she activated her slides. "Honorable board members," she began, her voice carrying the formal respect that the situation demanded. "I understand the concerns that have been raised about my recent focus on international expansion. However, I believe the evidence will show that this strategy has created opportunities and partnerships that will benefit our company for decades to come." Her presentation was compelling and thorough, demonstrating the financial projections for American market penetration, the strategic advantages of early entry into expanding sectors, and the cultural relationships that would be difficult for competitors to replicate. But Ryden could feel the skepticism in the room, the predetermined conclusion that her international focus represented abandonment of core Japanese business values. When she reached the section about cultural liaison partnerships, she turned toward Ryden with a slight nod. "I would like to introduce Ryden Brooks, our American cultural liaison, whose military background and deep understanding of Japanese business practices has been essential to the success of our expansion project." Ryden stood and moved to the front of the room, aware that every person present was evaluating him, not just as a business partner, but as a symbol of either successful international cooperation or dangerous foreign influence. "Honorable board members," he said, beginning with a formal bow that demonstrated respect for Japanese customs. "I am grateful for the opportunity to speak with you about the partnership between our organizations." He continued in Japanese, his fluency and cultural sensitivity creating visible surprise among board members who had clearly expected a typical American approach to international business. His presentation focused not on defending Keiko's decisions, but on demonstrating the strategic value of cultural bridging in an increasingly global economy. "The American military logistics network represents relationships and capabilities that purely domestic companies cannot access," he explained. Ms. Nakamura's vision created partnerships that provide competitive advantages in international markets while strengthening, rather than weakening, our domestic position. But it was when he began discussing the cultural elements of successful international business that the room's dynamic began to shift. His references to specific Japanese business customs, his understanding of the relationship between domestic strength and international success, and his respectful acknowledgement of traditional values while advocating for strategic innovation demonstrated a sophistication that impressed even the skeptical board members. "May I ask about your background, Mr. Brooks?" asked one of the board members. "Your understanding of our business culture is quite comprehensive for an American military liaison." "I was stationed in Japan for several years during my military service," Ryden replied. "I was married to a Japanese woman from Kyoto, and through her I learned to appreciate not just your language but the cultural principles that make Japanese businesses uniquely successful." The revelation created a subtle but significant shift in the room's atmosphere. What had been seen as foreign influence was reframed as cultural integration, someone who understood Japanese values from personal experience rather than mere professional necessity. "And your wife?" another board member inquired gently. "She passed away 3 years ago. Our daughter carries both American and Japanese heritage, and I believe that understanding of multiple cultures is exactly what will be required for business success in the coming decades." At that moment, something unexpected happened. The boardroom door opened quietly, and Lily entered with Keiko's mother. "Himeko, The elderly woman bowed respectfully to the assembled executives, while Lily, wearing a simple dress that somehow managed to look both American and appropriately formal for the Japanese business setting, moved to stand beside Ryden. "I apologize for the interruption," Emiko said formally. "But the child wished to see where her father was working, and I thought it might be appropriate for you to meet Ms. Nakamura's American family." The introduction of Lily as family, rather than simply the daughter of a business partner, was strategic and profound, representing acceptance by Keiko's traditional Japanese parents and suggesting that the international partnership had deeper roots than mere commercial arrangement. Lily bowed politely to the board members, then spoke carefully in the Japanese phrases Keiko had been teaching her. "Hajime mashite. Watashi no namae wa Riri desu. Yoroshiku onegai shimasu." The sight of a mixed heritage child introducing herself properly in Japanese, representing the successful integration of cultures rather than their conflict, created an emotional impact that no business presentation could have achieved. The board's response to Lily's presence was immediate and transformative. What had been a sterile corporate confrontation became something more personal and human. The kind of moment that reminded everyone present that business decisions affected real families and real lives. Board Chairman Sato, a distinguished man in his 70s who had remained carefully neutral throughout the proceedings, smiled at Lily with genuine warmth. "Your Japanese is very good, Lily-chan," he said kindly. "Are you enjoying your visit to Japan?" "Yes, very much," Lily replied in English, then added in careful Japanese, "Nihon wa totemo kirei desu." Her declaration that Japan was beautiful, delivered with obvious sincerity despite her limited vocabulary, created visible appreciation among the board members. But it was her next comment that shifted the entire dynamic of the meeting. "My mom was from Japan," she said, speaking naturally to the room full of executives as if they were simply adults she was meeting for the first time. "She died when I was little, but she taught me that Japanese people value honor and taking care of family. Keiko-san has been teaching me about mom's country and helping dad remember happy things instead of only sad ones." The innocent honesty of her statement reframed everything the board had been discussing. Suddenly, Keiko's work in America wasn't about abandoning Japanese values, but about honoring them, creating connections that strengthened rather than weakened cultural bonds. Yamamoto, the leader of the hostile takeover attempt, found himself in the impossible position of arguing against a partnership that clearly embodied the very cultural preservation he had been claiming to defend. "This is quite touching," he said, struggling to maintain his attack while appearing heartless in front of a child. "But sentiment cannot override business fundamentals. Ms. Nakamura's extended absence from Japan represents a fundamental neglect of domestic responsibilities." That's when Ryden stepped forward with the strategic counterstrike he and Keiko had prepared. "With respect, Yamamoto-san, I believe you may be misunderstanding the nature of Ms. Nakamura's achievements in America." He activated a new set of slides that had not been part of Keiko's original presentation. These documents show the specific contracts and partnerships that her cultural sensitivity made possible, agreements that your consortium's companies attempted to negotiate unsuccessfully for the past 2 years. The slides revealed detailed comparisons between Kuroda Industries' American partnerships and the failed attempts by Yamamoto's consortium to establish similar relationships. The data was devastating and undeniable, showing that Keiko's cultural approach had achieved results that traditional business methods had been unable to produce. "Furthermore," Ryden continued, "our intelligence sources indicate that your consortium's real motivation for this takeover attempt is not concern for Kuroda Industries' domestic performance, but desire to access the American partnerships that Ms. Nakamura has developed independently of your influence." The accusation hung in the air like a challenge, and Ryden could see from Yamamoto's expression that it had found its mark. But he wasn't finished. The American military logistics network that we have been developing with Kuroda Industries represents not just commercial opportunity, but strategic partnership between our nations. Disrupting that partnership through hostile corporate action would have implications that extend far beyond business considerations. The implicit suggestion that American government interests were involved in supporting Keiko's leadership added a dimension to the situation that the board had not previously considered. Corporate warfare was one thing. Potentially affecting international relations was quite another. Board Chairman Sato leaned forward with sharp attention. "Mr. Brooks, are you suggesting that this partnership has official American government support?" "I'm suggesting that successful cultural integration between American and Japanese organizations is viewed favorably by both governments, and that partnerships built on mutual respect and understanding serve broader interests than simple profit maximization." It was a masterful reframing that transformed Keiko from someone abandoning Japanese interests to someone advancing them through international cooperation. But the final stroke came from an unexpected source. "Excuse me," Lily said, raising her hand politely as if she were in school. "Can I ask a question?" Chairman Sato nodded with amused permission. "Why would you want to fire Keiko-san when she's helping Japanese companies work with American companies? Isn't that good for both countries?" "My mom always said that building bridges was more important than building walls." The innocent wisdom of a child's perspective cut through the corporate maneuvering with devastating clarity. The board members found themselves unable to argue against the logic of international cooperation without appearing to advocate for isolation and narrow thinking. Yamamoto's position was now completely untenable. His consortium's attack on Keiko had been revealed as self-serving rather than principled, and continuing to argue against partnerships that clearly benefited both nations would make him appear petty and destructive. "I believe," Chairman Sato said after a long moment of consideration, "that this board needs time to deliberate on the information we have received today. We will reconvene tomorrow morning to announce our decision." As the board members filed out of the conference room, several of them stopped to speak personally with Lily, complimenting her Japanese and asking about her experiences in their country. The transformation from hostile interrogation to friendly cultural exchange was complete and irreversible. Keiko remained composed until they were alone in the boardroom, then allowed herself a moment of relief that was visible only to Ryden and Lily. "Do you think we won?" Lily asked, with the directness that characterized all her important questions. "I think we showed them what winning really looks like," Ryden replied, putting his arm around both of them as they stood together in the gleaming boardroom high above Tokyo. Outside the windows, the city stretched endlessly in all directions, a testament to the power of growth, adaptation, and the courage to build bridges across any distance. 6 months later, the small ceremony took place in the garden behind the chapel at Nellis Air Force Base, with desert wildflowers blooming between weathered stone paths and the Nevada mountains rising like ancient guardians in the distance. The guest list was intimate: Garrison and several crew members from the cargo operation, Keiko's parents who had flown from Tokyo for the occasion, and a handful of friends who had watched Ryden rebuild his life with quiet admiration. Lily served as maid of honor, wearing a dress that incorporated both American and Japanese design elements. Her growing collection of origami cranes arranged as part of the altar decorations. She had reached 437 paper birds in her quest toward the traditional 1,000, each one more perfectly crafted than the last. The ceremony itself blended traditions from both cultures, with English vows spoken under cherry blossom branches that Keiko's mother had specially arranged to bloom in the desert spring. When Ryden placed the ring on Keiko's finger, a simple band that incorporated both American and Japanese design elements, he thought of Yuki's letter and felt not the weight of replacement, but the expansion of love that she had predicted and blessed. "I promise to honor what came before while building what comes next," he said, the words carrying weight that extended far beyond the traditional marriage vows. "I promise to be a bridge between our worlds and a foundation for our family," Keiko replied, looking at both Ryden and Lily as she spoke. The reception was held in the cargo bay where they had first met, transformed for the evening with lights strung between the massive aircraft and tables arranged to take advantage of the sunset views across the tarmac. It was an unusual venue for a wedding celebration, but it honored the place where their story had begun and the work that had brought them together. During the toasts, Garrison spoke about watching Ryden emerge from the shadows of grief into the light of new purpose. His words carrying the respect of someone who had witnessed true transformation. "I hired a cargo handler 3 years ago," he said, raising his glass toward the couple. "But what I got was a man whose hidden depths would eventually reshape not just our operation, but our understanding of what international partnership really means." Keiko's father, Hiroshi, offered remarks in both Japanese and English, acknowledging that his daughter had found not just a husband, but a cultural bridge that would strengthen both their families. "In Japan, we believe that the best marriages create something larger than either person could achieve alone," he said. "Today, we celebrate the union of two people who have already proven this truth through their work and their devotion to the child they share." But perhaps the most meaningful speech came from an unexpected source. Lily had asked to say something, and she stood beside the head table with the serious composure she brought to important moments. "When Dad used to tell me stories about Mom, they were always sad stories about missing someone," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the assembled guests. "But now when he tells me stories about Mom, they're happy stories about love that continues even when people aren't here anymore. Keiko-san didn't replace Mom. She helped us remember that Mom would want us to be happy." Her words brought tears to many eyes, but they were tears of joy rather than sorrow, recognition that healing could honor the past while embracing the future. The business results had exceeded everyone's expectations. The board vote in Tokyo had been unanimous in favor of retaining Keiko as CEO, with several members privately acknowledging that the cultural integration strategy represented the company's best path towards sustainable international growth. The American expansion had generated partnerships worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and other Japanese corporations were now seeking similar cultural liaison arrangements. Ryden's role had evolved into something unprecedented, a position that combined logistical expertise with cultural interpretation, helping bridge not just language barriers, but fundamental differences in business philosophy and relationship building. His work had become a model for international corporate cooperation, and he was frequently consulted by other companies attempting similar expansions. But the most important changes were personal rather than professional. Keiko had relocated her primary residence to Nevada while maintaining offices in both countries, creating a truly international lifestyle that honored both cultures. Their home, a larger place with space for Lily's growing independence and their shared life, displayed artifacts from both their histories. Yuki's recipes hanging in the kitchen alongside photographs of their new family adventures. Lily was thriving in ways that reflected her multicultural heritage. She was becoming fluent in Japanese, had developed genuine friendships with other military families, and carried herself with the confident curiosity of someone who understood that the world was full of fascinating differences to explore and appreciate. On their wedding night, after the guests had departed and Lily had fallen asleep surrounded by origami cranes and wedding cake remnants, Ryden and Keiko sat together in their garden and talked about the future they would build together. "Do you ever miss the simplicity of your old life?" Keiko asked, curled against his side under the desert stars. "I miss the certainty," he said honestly, knowing exactly what each day would bring, never having to worry about complications or changes. "But I don't miss the emptiness. I didn't realize how much of my life I was just managing rather than actually living. And now I look forward to tomorrow. I look forward to seeing what Lily will discover about herself and the world. I look forward to the projects we'll work on together and the problems we'll solve. I look forward to growing old with you and watching our family expand in ways we can't even imagine yet. Above them, the Nevada sky stretched endless and full of stars, the same constellations that had watched over ancient travelers and would continue to guide future journeys long after their own story had become part of the larger human saga of love finding its way across any distance, any difference, any loss. In her bedroom, Lily dreamed of reaching 1,000 paper cranes and the wish she would make when that milestone was achieved. But she had already learned the most important lesson, that the best wishes were the ones that came true gradually, through patience and love, and the courage to keep building bridges, even when the distance seemed impossibly vast. The cargo planes sat quiet on the tarmac, ready for tomorrow's missions, carrying the world's necessities from one place to another, just as love carried hope across cultures, languages, and the spaces between hearts that dared to remain open despite everything.